Evelina Marsh had rehearsed this night for weeks. The Ashcombe Charity Gala was the biggest event of the season, held in the grand ballroom of Ashcombe House, where crystal chandeliers threw soft light over marble floors, and a string quartet played near tall windows draped in velvet curtains. Waiters moved quietly through the crowd with trays of champagne, and laughter rose and fell like music of its own. Evelina had chosen a midnight blue gown for the occasion. She stood in front of her mirror that evening for a long time, smoothing the fabric, pinning her hair, telling herself that tonight would be different. She had known Julian Ashcombe since they were children. Their families' estates shared a border, and as kids, they had climbed the same trees and fished in the same stream behind the old stone wall. As they grew older, something quieter and deeper had grown between them, something Evelina had never dared to name out loud, though she felt certain Julian understood it too. Julian had become the Duke of Ashcombe 2 years earlier, after his father's sudden passing. Since then, his life had filled with duties, meetings, and expectations that Evelina could only imagine from a distance. Still, whenever their paths crossed at events like this one, there had always been a warmth between them, a familiarity that made her believe, foolishly perhaps, that they still shared something real. Tonight, she had decided, she would finally tell him how she felt. She had convinced herself that enough time had passed, that circumstances had shifted, that maybe he had been waiting for her to speak first. She was wrong. As she crossed the terrace, near the fountain lined with white orchids, she saw him standing, with Lady Camille Whitmore, a woman known throughout society for her sharp wit and her family's considerable fortune. Evelina had heard whispers of a possible engagement between the two families, but had dismissed them as gossip. Seeing them together now, standing so close, something cold settled in her chest. Still, she walked toward him. She had come this far. She would not turn back now. "Julian," she said gently, offering a small smile, despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Before she could say anything more, Lady Camille slipped her arm through his, claiming her place beside him with practiced ease. Julian's expression shifted, becoming distant, almost cold, in a way Evelina had never seen before. "Miss Marsh," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the terrace, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "I don't believe we have anything further to discuss." The words hit her like a slap. For a moment, she simply stood there, stunned, watching as heads turned in her direction. Conversations dimmed. She felt every eye in that corner of the terrace settle upon her, felt the heat rising in her cheeks, felt her carefully rehearsed words crumble into nothing. She would not cry here. She refused to give anyone that satisfaction. With as much composure as she could gather, Evelina offered a small, polite nod. "Of course, Your Grace," she said quietly, setting her champagne glass down on a nearby table with a steady hand that betrayed none of the storm inside her. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly against the marble, her back straight, her chin lifted, until she reached her car outside. Only then, in the darkness of the back seat, did she allow the tears to fall. What Evelina did not know, and what Julian could never bring himself to explain in that moment, was the truth behind his cruelty. Earlier that week, his grandmother, the formidable Dowager Duchess, had summoned him to her study. She had learned of his growing closeness with Evelina and made her position clear. The Ashcombe family's finances, quietly strained for years behind a facade of wealth, depended heavily on a merger being arranged between the Ashcombe and Whitmore estates. If Julian pursued any attachment seen as unsuitable, particularly one that threatened the upcoming engagement to Camille, the Dowager Duchess had threatened to cut off the medical trust that had, for years, quietly supported the care of Evelina's ailing father. Julian had spent that entire day fighting the decision, arguing, pleading, searching for another way. But his grandmother remained unmoved, cold and certain in her resolve. In the end, believing there was no better option, Julian convinced himself that a swift, public rejection was a kind of mercy. Better a single sharp wound, he told himself, than a slow and uncertain suffering. Better Evelina hate him quickly and move forward with her life than be caught in the middle of a family conflict she had no part in creating. He told himself she would recover swiftly. He told himself this was the responsible choice, the selfless choice, even the loving choice. He was wrong about how it would feel, both for her and for himself. For 3 weeks following the gala, Julian buried himself in his duties. He attended meetings about the merger, reviewed documents concerning the joint accounts, and accompanied Camille to various social functions as expected of him. On the surface, everything proceeded according to plan. Yet at night, alone in his study, he found himself replaying that moment on the terrace again and again, remembering the flicker of hurt in Evelina's eyes before she managed to hide it. He told himself it would fade with time. It did not. Then came the formal engagement announcement, held in the same ballroom where he had rejected her weeks before. The room glittered with the same chandeliers, the same music, the same crowd of familiar faces. Julian stood beside Camille as toasts were made in their honor, smiling when expected, nodding when appropriate, saying all the right words at all the right moments. Yet throughout the evening, his eyes kept drifting toward the Marsh family's table near the far wall. Evelina's parents were seated there, along with her cousin and a few family friends, but her chair, positioned neatly among them, remained empty the entire night. No note of apology had been sent, no excuse had been offered, just silence, and an empty chair that seemed to grow larger and more unbearable with each passing hour. That empty seat undid him far more thoroughly than any tears could have. He found himself unable to focus on his own celebration, distracted by a growing unease that settled deep in his chest. Something was wrong. He could feel it. Near the end of the evening, he found Evelina's cousin near the coat check, gathering her wrap before leaving. He approached carefully, keeping his voice low. "Where is Evelina tonight?" he asked, trying to sound casual, though his voice betrayed the tension underneath. The cousin studied him for a long moment before answering, her expression unreadable. "Her father passed away last week," she said quietly. Quite suddenly, the funeral was small, private. She didn't feel it appropriate to attend anything social so soon after. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. He had known Evelina's father had been unwell for some time, but he had not known the illness had progressed so quickly, nor that it had ended in such a way. "And Evelina?" he managed to ask. "Is she all right?" The cousin's expression softened slightly, though her words remained firm. "She's selling her flat in the city. She's leaving for Edinburgh in 2 days to settle her father's estate and start fresh somewhere new. Somewhere away from Ashcombe. Away from all of this." She paused, studying him carefully. "Away from you, Your Grace, if I'm being honest." Julian stood frozen for a moment, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy fog. He realized, with a clarity that felt almost painful, that his attempt at protecting Evelina through public rejection had cost her something far greater than a moment's embarrassment. It had cost her trust, the very foundation of whatever had existed between them, and now, grieving and alone, she was preparing to leave without a single word to him, without giving him any chance to explain. He thanked the cousin quietly and returned to the ballroom, his mind racing. He watched Camille laughing with a group of guests near the fountain, radiant and confident, entirely unaware of the storm building within him. He thought of the merger, the family finances, his grandmother's threats, and the careful plans that had shaped every decision he'd made over the past month. Then he thought of Evelina, standing alone at her father's funeral, packing away years of memories into boxes, preparing to leave the only home she had ever known, all without so much as a message from him. He made his decision that night. He found Camille near the terrace doors and asked to speak with her privately. Their conversation was brief but honest. He explained, as gently as he could, that he could not continue with an engagement built upon financial arrangements and family pressure rather than genuine affection. Camille, to her credit, listened calmly, and though disappointment flickered across her face, she nodded with quiet understanding, admitting she had sensed his heart was elsewhere for some time. Julian then sought out his grandmother, finding her seated near the fireplace in the smaller drawing room, away from the noise of the celebration. He told her plainly that he would not continue building his future on threats and ultimatums. He informed her that he intended to find another solution for the estate's finances, one that did not require sacrificing the people he cared about. His grandmother's expression hardened, but Julian remained firm, speaking with a calm resolve he had not felt in weeks. By the time he left Ashcombe House that night, the engagement had been quietly ended, and a weight he had carried for a month had finally begun to lift. Early the next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Julian arrived at the train station, dressed simply, without any of the formal trappings of his title. He had learned from the cousin that Evelina planned to depart for Edinburgh soon, and he intended to speak with her before she left, even if it meant standing on a cold platform for hours waiting. He did not have to wait long. Evelina arrived not long after, dressed warmly for travel, a single suitcase beside her. She saw him standing near the platform's edge before he saw her, and for a moment, she considered turning around and walking straight back out of the station. She did not. Instead, she walked toward him, her expression guarded, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "You don't get to do this," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion clearly simmering beneath her words. "You don't get to humiliate me in front of everyone, and then show up quietly afterward, expecting forgiveness." "I know," Julian said softly. "I'm not asking you to forgive what happened at the gala, not yet, maybe not ever. I'm asking for the chance to explain properly, here, in public, where anyone passing by can hear every word." He told her everything then, standing on that platform as commuters passed around them. He explained his grandmother's threats regarding her father's medical trust, the pressure surrounding the merger with the Whitmore family, and his own mistaken belief that a swift, public rejection would somehow protect her from being caught in the crossfire of his family's problems. He admitted, with quiet shame, that he had chosen what felt like the easier path, rather than trusting her enough to face the difficulty together. Evelina listened silently, her jaw tight, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Years of careful self-protection warred within her against the undeniable sincerity she heard in his voice. "You should have told me," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "Whatever the reason, you should have trusted me enough to tell me the truth, instead of making that choice for me in front of a room full of strangers." "You're right," Julian admitted, "and I can't undo what already happened. But I can promise you this, I will never again choose silence over honesty, not when it comes to you." Evelina studied him for a long moment, the sounds of the station fading into the background. She thought of her father, of the quiet strength he had always shown, of the lessons he had taught her about standing firm even when it was difficult. She thought of the years she had known Julian, the boy who had once helped her climb trees and catch fish, now standing before her as a man trying, however imperfectly, to make things right. She did not fall into his arms. She did not offer immediate forgiveness. Instead, she allowed her train to leave without her, and turned to face him fully. "You have exactly 1 cup of coffee," she said, gesturing toward a small cafe at the edge of the station, "to convince me you've truly changed. And if you ever again choose silence over speaking to me honestly, whether in public or in private, there will be no second platform, no second empty chair, and certainly no second chance." Julian nodded, a small, hopeful smile crossing his face for the first time in weeks. "Understood," he said. As they walked together toward the cafe, the early morning sun beginning to rise over the station, Julian found himself thinking that it was, without question, the most important conversation he had ever had. He did not know exactly how it would end, whether 1 cup of coffee would be enough, or whether it would take many more conversations, many more honest moments, to rebuild what had been broken. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something close to hope, and he intended to earn every bit of trust he had lost, one honest word at a time.